Could there be places right here on Earth, stargates and portals that can take you through time and space?
If portals and stargates do not exist, why does our government then have military bases at most of these sites around the world?
Can a person die and be possessed with an ancient spirit?
How could one woman know exactly how to rebuild an ancient Egyptian temple from rubble and ruins in just 2.5 years?
And did they reconstruct this temple because it is a stargate to the Egyptian gods?
And how could specific places be the result of so many missing ships, planes, and people with no remaining evidence of their even existence?
Tune in today as we explore and uncover some of the world's most secretive, unexplained, and otherworldly phenomena.
You're not going to want to miss this episode. We are so excited that you decided to join us again for part 2 of Stargates, Portals, and Wormholes. There is so much information here that we could cover this for a very long time, but we're not. We're going to just kind of do 2 weeks of this one before we move on. There has been such amazing information.
Oh, absolutely. The more we researched and dug into it, the more I was just fascinated by how much information there is and how many portals and stargates there really are.
That is the exciting thing that most people probably don't know. I mean, if you've heard of it, it's mostly because of the movies and books, that kind of stuff. But you think of like one or so. But this goes back. We're not just talking thousands of years, but we're talking pre-flood, and I would maybe even say farther back
than that.
Yes. But while you will find a lot of shows, you're going to find a lot of content if you research stargates, portals, wormholes, but very rarely you're going to run across something that comes at it from a biblical and Christian perspective.
Right.
And that's really what we're here to do. I mean, we're not here to educate you on stargates because it gets pretty deep on portals and wormholes and all the science and everything. We're going to look at that even a little bit later. We're not going to go too deep on you, but it's fascinating what they are trying to accomplish and what they're trying to do, just even in little small labs in colleges.
Right.
It's more than just a theory, right?
Oh,
now.
Absolutely.
So why we're breaching into this is because what would normally come through a stargate or a portal?
Well, in all the shows or movies, it's aliens or something, some being, extraterrestrials.
Okay, so that's what we're really getting into, is we're going to then approach into the whole alien deception. So people are waiting for these ancient aliens, ancient astronauts to show up today and take us to be with them in the stars. In fact, again, this is for later shows, but to just build on this, that's really what this is about. There are so many groups, so many occults out there that call themselves the Star Walkers, the Star Children, the Milky Way Society, whatever, that have been supposedly communicating with our space brothers. Is it really that? Or is it
They're communicating with something, for sure.
More of a demonic spiritual nature. But how are these things moving back and forth?
Right.
And that is where you will see, through all the depictions and the drawings and the legends and the mythology, every time these gods come through, it's through a gate or a door, a portal looking.
Right. Yeah, some of them are round or some of them are more door shaped, but the similarity across all the civilizations is quite fascinating, and you can't ignore it. You can't say, oh, it's just all a bunch of hooey.
And places where they would have had no contact.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, from Istanbul, so Acropolis, 200 miles from Istanbul, they had unearthed an ancient gateway to hell. Now, you have to realize this was back with mythology. This is a realm of Hades and Pluto. They used Pluto more as the gatekeeper. So it was called Pluto's Gate. It's so sacred that only the occult priests could go near. Now, here's the thing. What we know now is that there was these toxic, noxious CO2 gases coming up. And so they would take sacrifices in to prove to the people, so that way the people would stay completely away from it. And they would go in and they would take the animal, anything, birds even flying above, anything that got close to this would just die on contact because it sucked the oxygen right out of them. Yet the priests never were harmed and never died. So obviously there had to be some sort of knowledge that they had, and it was kind of a deterrent to keep anybody else from looking. And there has been much speculation, of course we do not know this, but much speculation that at the end of this corridor, this water corridor, that there was a Stargate or a portal where they were communing with the gods, but they didn't want anyone else to find out about it.
Oh, sure.
Now here's where the interesting thing is. 7,000 miles away though, in Machu Picchu, Peru, in the Andes Mountains, guess what?
There are ancient Incan ruins called the Temple of Three Windows, and in their creation legend, there were three gods that came through three portals or doorways that those three brother gods came through and started the Incas in South America. And so that three-windowed temple was to represent and honor them.
And it is also set for the summer solstice. It comes right through that. But we're talking 7,000 miles away. Basically same stories, though, really. They would have no way
of knowing that. Well, and, you know, I mean, the Incas are another civilization that we'll kind of get into some of this later, that they cropped up. They had technology and knowledge and everything so far ahead of their time, and then they disappeared.
So as we talked about last week with the whole wormhole theory, where did that even come from? Was that just from a bad dream, or who concocted that?
Well, actually, in 1935 at Princeton, Albert Einstein and Nicholas Rosen published this theory. They published a theory of relativity that allows for shortcuts across the space continuum. Those paths they called Einstein-Rosen bridges, or wormholes in essence. It's the bending of space and connecting two different times.
Okay, and so it's not just as you would think. It's not just from point A to point B. It is if you had a piece of paper and you were to curve it and you were to go from point A there to point B here, you bent time and space, made this wormhole to go through. Okay, so they were talking like if you were to travel by the speed of light, to go from here to the next closest planet or whatever, it would take you at the speed of light like 4.5 years to get there. But if you could somehow bend that space and put it from here to here, you could be there in just a matter of moments.
Interesting thought. Which, in essence, often is what the concept of Stargates does, is it connects 2 points and allows you to walk from one end to the other.
Which, unlike a wormhole, where you're having to bend and manipulate time and space, where with a portal, you're basically just going from here to there.
Right.
You're bypassing the whole, because they're like gates, they're like holes, doorways already there. You're bypassing that whole passage, I guess.
Would probably require knowledge and power outside of what we possess.
Oh, sure. Unless you're a Once Upon a Time fan and you had magic beans, or you had some way to open
or the
a
Wicked
portal.
Witch of the West. Yes. She can do that.
So not to bog you down with a lot of scientific jargon, but they're working with esoteric matter, and what they're basically saying is you need negative mass to do this. We're not used to negative mass. We have positive mass, so we work with that, but that doesn't mean they say that negative mass doesn't exist.
You just haven't figured it out yet or found it.
And it would take tons of energy to create this wormhole. Millions more than it would be for a nuclear bomb. But however, in 1991 at Vanderbilt, they came up with the idea that the Big Bang, now, okay, this is where I said we're not going to bog you down on this, because this is one of those things you can sit around at a coffee shop and throw out a lot of theories.
Right.
First of all, they're going with the Big Bang theory. And they're saying that when the Big Bang happened, it caused all these itty bitty little wormholes, like we'll say the size of a pin.
Okay.
But the size of an atom. They're saying, okay, so time and space, universe is expanding and growing. It's continually going. I won't argue that. It could be. But they're saying, so then that way the wormhole would have expanded with it. So you take something the size of an atom that all of a sudden now would be gigantic.
Okay.
You know, there again, you could discuss anything over a latte.
Right.
Or in my case, Mountain Dew. I don't know.
That's right. Well, going back to even what we talked about with the Incas, in the Chihuahua Desert, there was a town of almost 10,000 people that existed, and they had these T-shaped carved in stone openings that looked a lot like the ones in Peru. And it was noted in all of these hieroglyphs that star people came through, and they were tall and blonde, interestingly enough. And they say it still happens, but that particular group of people are gone. They've
It's the ancestors from way back there moved up in the mountains, few scattered around, but they come back and it's a religious site, it's a sacred site, a holy site. And they say that the people who come through there have a Caucasian appearance.
Interesting. You don't hear that as often.
No. Well, how about Sargasso Sea is 2,000 miles long, 7,000 miles wide. It's called the sea without shores because it's in between the ocean there. But it's called the Sea of Lost Ships. It's called the Sea of Fear. The sea is blue and as if the current doesn't even affect it, which is what's really weird. There's no current here, so the rest of the ocean is just, going up like crazy. That is calm.
Oh, wow.
But here's the thing. Ships could not get out and were trapped in this area. Now this is where they found, and this may sound familiar, where there are ships that have been found sailing absolutely perfectly intact, not one passenger on it. The Roseleaf went from Germany to Cuba. The ship was sailing perfect, yet it had
no crew.
No crew. They found this, they came alongside, they put half of the shipmates on that schooner and sailed along with it. And then fog happened, and then the schooner was there. It was, all of a sudden they noticed it was sailing erratically, and when they got up to it, the second crew had disappeared. Just gone.
Wow.
Now, it is in direct contact with what we would call
the Bermuda Triangle.
They actually overlap. Well, where the Bermuda Triangle is, it's like this, and the water comes like right here. So the Bermuda Triangle is bigger than this stretch of water. A lot of people have speculated that it is a Stargate or a portal because they have not been able to find any remains. They have looked, they have gone, nothing. Planes just disappear and the wreckage is never found. Ships, though, that are perfectly fine, but not one person on it, and no remains, no nothing. Well, okay, so we know about the Bermuda Triangle.
That's a familiar one.
Yeah, we even talked about that in school, and they tried to come up with a lot of different theories of how that maybe could be, although they never could explain how crew members could just disappear.
Right.
But we have something even closer to that right here in the United States.
And this I didn't know. This is fascinating. The Bermuda Triangle was well publicized. This one I hadn't heard of. So in Lake Michigan, they have the Michigan Triangle. And this portion is associated with more bizarre and weird disappearances. There was a captain that vanished from behind his locked door.
Yeah, he actually went in to his room.
To his quarters.
His quarters, and they had set the chart for this area. And when the first mate went to go get him, he knocked on the door, and no, he didn't answer, and he knocked again, and the door was locked. And they had to finally bust the door open, and when they did, all the windows were shut, everything was shut in this, and the captain was just gone.
There's accounts of 40 planes that have disappeared in that area. There was a Northwest Airlines flight carrying 58 people that disappeared. There was no wreckage. That was in the 1950s.
Yep, June 23rd, 1950. Absolutely nothing. Not even so much as a button or a hat or a
piece of
nothing.
Fuselage in nothing. Right.
So, could it be an entrance to a wormhole? Could it be a Stargate? Could it be a portal? There's something else more interesting in this area. This triangle actually goes like down in Lake Michigan. this is the spot where there have been numerous video footage and people,
like
eyewitnesses of UFOs coming out of the water and going into the water. Now here's the thing. Every time that they have seen it, the main thing that everybody has said is it glows. It glows this like iridescent green as it's coming out, as it's going in. That seems to be pretty standard with everyone that talks about a portal, is this glowing back and forth. Well, so we kind of hinted a little bit. Again, we're not going to get too deep into physics, but this is profound in a way that we have people now, after all these years, who have found ways in lab to try to make some of this happen. So at Cal State Fullerton, 2013, a lab physicist, Jim Woodward, he worked with the Mach's principle, the motion of mass on Earth and the way mass moves in and out. Of course, we know that inertia pushes back. So if you had, he used an apple. If you were to push an apple, it's not just going to go because it has its own inertia that's pushing back. Why he got into this, he was all about the propulsion. So he works kind of behind the scenes for NASA. How's the quickest way that we can get something up in the air? Mm-hmm. So whether it be your rockets, whether it be the space shuttle, whether it be planes, you have to have something pushing to go forward, or if you're trying to stop, you've got inertia coming back this way. Mm-hmm. So he's going, the only way that you can get stuff up is through thrust. But what if he could change the way that you could move something without that inertia thrust? It would revolutionize all space travel. So this is where this Mach's principle came in. It's like when you're riding, so think about, we're in Nebraska, so we don't exactly have waves here that you could go surfboarding on.
Jet skiing.
Yeah, but then they can't surfboard that.
No.
So if you think about riding a wave, right, that does not have the thrust, it doesn't have the propulsion, you're gliding with it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of that principle, that's what this Mach's principle is. So how could you create a wave in space that you move forward on? So that way you're not using all this energy.
Sure. And
you could go so much faster, or you could... But he took the next step, and the way... Again, I'm not the scientific mind that he is. But he said you could even create wormholes with it.
Wow.
Let me ask you a question. If you're a sci-fi buff, you watch movies, you watch TV shows, I mean, how cool would it be to open a door and just walk through it, or have a hole open up that you could just jump through and you go from here to where you need to go? Mm-hmm. That would be pretty scary and take a lot of faith that you're going to go from point A to point B. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what do you think of the concept of stargates and portals?
It's something that has always been intriguing, again, because I thought the movies were interesting. But the more I've learned over the last few years, the more I've taken it from that's an interesting movie theory to there's too much out there for me to say, oh, that isn't happening, that can't happen, that's never happened. I'm going, that's not only happened for centuries, millennia, but it's still happening today. And we need to be aware of that. I mean, aside from the fact it's cool, it's also really dangerous because we don't know what's coming through the other side, but I'm pretty sure it's not good.
Well, and that's just it. We have scientists that have devoted, physicists that have devoted their whole life to trying to create wormholes, or to create a stargate or a portal, or on the religious side, you have people who are trying to summons or a way to open those portals, bring things through. We don't know.
The kind of stuff that's probably traveling through, not good.
We don't have that kind of knowledge, nor I don't think we were supposed to possess it. Well, think about it. So if there were things that were using these portals and stargates way back pre-Noah,
right,
post-Noah, mm-hmm. and now they're doing the same mechanism, and we haven't figured it out in all that time by now. We're supposed to not.
Right. And any information obtained has been used for not good purposes.
Well, we're going to dive a little deeper into this. What happens when maybe you get a little too comfortable with things that come through the portal? And what happens when maybe you get just a little too much knowledge? Mm-hmm. We're going to take you back to ancient Egypt. For those of you who maybe if you were like me when you were younger, I was always fascinated with Egyptian culture and stuff. Probably mostly because it doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
So there's a mystery in itself.
Oh, absolutely. And just their stories and I don't know, the power that they seemed to possess and everything was just so that they had. Fascinating. Oh, absolutely.
Well, there's a town called Abydos. It's in Egypt, just quite a ways, kind of by the Nile River. It's a burial site for the first pharaohs. Now, people came to communicate with Osiris. Now, you can get into, I think we talked a little bit last time about ancient Egypt and how Osiris came about, but then his brother was jealous and he cut him up into a bunch of pieces and put him in the Nile, and his sister wife Isis found him and sewed him all back together, and through magical means ended up getting pregnant from him, and that's how they had Horus. Mm-hmm. Now this is Egyptian. I know I didn't just make that up. It's even more so than that, but I cleaned it up a lot.
Right.
This is ancient Egypt
mythology.
It's their creation. It's their everything from the beginning. How everything kind of came about. Well, why is that important? Because everything centers on Osiris, because Osiris, in fact, on a lot of the hieroglyphics, it shows the solar barge, which would make a journey from this world to the next. And then, interestingly enough, when you look at that barge, it looks like
an Einstein-Rosen bridge.
Wormhole. So, there's a lot of things that we think as Christians that are very black and white. Very black and white. Well, if you can keep it very black and white, I guess maybe that makes the world a little simpler, possibly. Except what do you do when you run into those things
that don't fit into any of those boxes?
No.
And honestly, if you've read the Bible, there's a lot of things that don't fit into boxes very well.
And yet?
Here we are.
Well, there is one particular gal in this story. It has fascinated me from a different standpoint.
So in 1904, there was a young girl who was the single daughter of this couple, and she had fallen down the stairs and hit her head, and she died. They called the doctor in, he came, he had checked her, he had declared that she was no longer living. And I think he checked on her a couple of times, so they had put her up on the bed, and he went to get the nurse to come back and care for the body. And when they came back, she was sitting up on the bed playing.
Now, this was in London, England.
Right. And, the family kind of looked at it as a miracle. But from that point...
She kept crying, I want to go home.
Right.
I want to go home. And they're like, you are home. And she'd say, no, I'm not home.
Right.
So when she was still just a little girl, probably about 4 or 5, they went to a museum there in London, England, which she'd been just going through the museum. But when they hit the Egyptian artifacts, she just her whole demeanor changed. She ran over and she started yelling, my people, and she sat down by this sarcophagus, this mummy, and did not want to leave. And her parents did not know what to make of it.
When she was about 6, she saw in a magazine this ruined temple that had been completed by Ramses II in about 1300 BC. But she recognized it, knew what it should look like, and said it was her home.
All right, so here you have a 3-year-old. Whether she died or not, we don't know. But she completely changed into a totally different child, which head injury could do that. But then after that, she knew things. I mean, she was not exposed to anything Egyptian, and yet she knew everything about the Egyptian culture. She knew everything about the people of the time. She knew how things should be. She was devastated when she saw this temple that was ruined, and she knew that it needed to be back to the way that it was. How does one explain that? Now, if you Google anything, they're going to tell you reincarnation. It's true, because of everything. Her name is Seti. I don't want to give her a ton of publicity, but it's just the fact that it's a big push for reincarnation. First thing I said was, could an evil spirit possess a child? We know they can when they're alive, but can they do that when they're dead? Can they take over the body? Or did she come back alive and somehow the spirit was attached? I don't know, but the interesting thing was that there's a lot of stuff on her. And there was actually one interview, there's many, but there was one where she said that maybe an ancient spirit came into her when she had that accident. She thought that was probably closer to the right. So after seeing this temple in ruins, it kind of became like her whole life's mission. She became obsessed with it. And as soon as she got older, she was bound and determined she was going to Egypt. And so she started studying in Egypt, and she, at the time she was an archaeologist, she was along with them. But she started telling them about this temple, and she knew all the ruins. And the ruins were like in over 2,500 pieces. And she said, she was so adamant that this thing had to be put back together, that she could help them piece it back together.
And she did. Over 2,500 pieces of just ancient ruins where no one else had any idea what would go where. And it took them 2.5 years to completely rebuild it.
Well, they said if it hadn't been for Seti, it would have been 20 plus years that they could even put it together. But she was so adamant about that, and this is the extraordinary thing. So while that temple had been destroyed, when they put it back together, the hieroglyphs, the pictures, the mosaics on the wall are almost still in perfect condition.
Right.
Very few spots
where you can't read or see.
Or have a little chunk out of it, or even a crack. I mean, it's phenomenal. And it tells the story of a lot of these things with Stargates, with where the ship to the underworld that looks like the
Einstein-Rosa Bridge
is at. But then there's also this bell-shaped thing that's really weird, and it's got scientists going nuts over it because it looks too technological for Egyptian culture.
Egyptian civilization, because it looks a lot like a Tesla coil.
Yeah. I know that that's what most of them go with, and they keep pushing that. It could be. For me, that was a stretch.
Now, the Einstein-Rosa Bridge, that
looked just like it. But the whole Osiris device being a Tesla coil, but obviously maybe there is something way more to all this than what we knew. Which would be that Oshemet barge, if you're looking for the Osiris resurrection. Now, okay. That was the whole point. Let's bring this back into how does this work with a Christian view. In Egyptian culture, the whole point was to resurrect Osiris. In most of the ancient religions, they're constantly trying to resurrect something. Except they never resurrect. We are the only ones who actually have resurrection through Jesus Christ, who did die, who went all the way down to Tartarus, which probably through many portals, came back to life.
Right.
Where all the other ones are trying to achieve that, but they never have. Which, if you think about this in the fallen realm sense,
they're always trying to take what Jesus did or what God did and make it bad or change it or do it their way.
So if you think of the fallen angels, the fallen realm, or even the angels in general, of course in that 90, there is no time or space. So that's where I would argue that maybe, You don't need the wormholes. Maybe that portal could be just like we talked about. When you die, you walk from here right into the next. You cut the chase.
Right.
That's where the spiritual side would have to come from. Scientists are still trying to explain everything through
what we can, through the physical realm.
Right, through a scientific mindset. The fallen realm has known from the very beginning kind of what was going to take place. And so they tried to thwart that. They tried to change it. They tried to recreate or do whatever they can here on Earth, maybe what they lost when they fell from heaven. So the thing that this Seti, how she became Seti, she married a guy in Egypt. They had a son who she named Seti. Means mother of. So explaining the unexplained. So here's a gal that if she was really, as she kept saying, people thought her family kept telling her she had a screw loose. And she knocked her head. But how could she know these things? So besides putting this temple back together, and the way she put it back together is the way she remembered it. And then she argued that where are the garden? Where is the temple gardens? And they said, there isn't a temple garden. She said, yes, there's a temple garden right here. No, we've excavated. She made them go. They excavated again, and they found the gardens exactly as she told them that they would be. All right, we know through the scriptures that reincarnation is not real.
Right. We also know through the scriptures that spirits are very real.
And the spirit that could have been at that time that knew that stuff, maybe the one that even helped them construct the temple.
Originally.
Could that spirit have come back through maybe a portal, maybe a Stargate? I don't know. But the whole point why she said she was adamant about recreating
this temple,
Abydos, was not even so much for the temple to worship again and the hieroglyphics, but because she believed that it was a Stargate.
I know that some of the content that we've talked about in the past has been a stretch, and the last couple of episodes are probably the biggest ones yet. But there are so many examples of things like this that cannot be explained away by the logical, rational, physical world. And it's quite possible that whatever spirit or is giving her this information and feeding her this knowledge wants that portal to be rebuilt or reestablished. They might have plans for it.
Well, why we kind of wanted to end a little bit on Seti is because there's several things here that your little spidey senses will get to listening to. When she was older, she started talking about having visitations at night by these people that would visit her and would tell her some of this stuff. And then there was one particular night where she got up, these things visited her, and she started just frantically writing some sort of code, and she had no clue what it was. Later, she found out it was called dynamic or demonic. I'm not for sure which I would play the second. But then these beings came back, like in a couple nights, and told her how to decode it, and it took her much longer to decode it. So we know that there was
something visiting her and giving her information.
Well, then she also had been visited or had dreams. That was the thing too. She'd have dreams. And it was Nefertiti's tomb. They have been in search for that for ever. But especially in the 1970s, it really picked up. Because there was a thought process to Nefertiti that her parents are not known.
Right.
And the pictures of her is this elongated head. And she's the first one, and her husband also, Arkananu, is also has the same elongated head.
And he's the sun god. And he has a sun disk that he communicates with, this disk with wings.
Now here's the thing. Everybody else's have been found, but both of these two have not been found. So if you happen to be watching Ancient Aliens, I say this because I know a lot of people who watch the show. I gotta admit that when you watch it, they say a lot of stuff without saying a whole lot. They say a lot of the key words of why you're watching it, but when you get done, you're like, that was just a lot of words and a lot of gibberish. It really didn't have a lot of substance. It's always questioning, could it be? Could it be? Well, what they're trying to do is tie these ancient pharaohs with aliens, because as we're going to get into, this whole thing is about really religion. Who are you going to worship?
It's interesting though, because Seti says that she knows where Nefertiti's tomb is. That in some conversation with Pharaoh Seti, which is the pharaoh that she knew so well, supposedly, she was told that King Tut is a son of Akhenaten with a different mother. And so in his tomb, there's like a chamber, a secret chamber off of it, that is where they would be buried. So archaeologists have gone and looked, and with like x-ray and different things, infrared, there is a doorway in a tomb or a room of some sort.
Well, we don't know.
Right.
There's just a doorway that it could be.
Into something. But they don't want to disturb King Tut's tomb to get to this. So thus far...
Because there's hieroglyphics all over it and everything. In order to do that, you would have to disturb his tomb.
That's a big deal.
So my question is, I wonder if they will find the remains. You know, for those of you who are Indiana Jones fans, you know, the Crystal Skull, we found out that, you know, you can put so much information on quartz crystal. I did not realize that, what it can hold. You think about these crystal skulls, and then I said, well, you think about Superman when he is when he creates his fortress, yes, and what is it? It's like quartz crystals that he plugs in, and it tells him all the information that he needs to know. Maybe Hollywood and some of the stuff wasn't so far-fetched, uninformed as we think that they are. Well, we want to kind of leave you with, right here, some hard evidence bridging this gap from where we're at with portals and what is on the other side that you might be walking into or summoning into.
Right. And just the fact that there are people right here that are doing those very things. So in 1918, Aleister Crowley, who was the founder of the Church of Satan, performed a ritual called the, I might not say it right, Amalantra working. So he was trying to create a vortex to connect the seen and the unseen. And according to Crowley, it worked. And there was a being named Lamb that came through it. And he communicated with Lamb kind of all throughout.
And what did he look like?
Well, interestingly enough, now this was in 1918, but Crowley drew a picture of him that later on, all of the sort of outcry of alien grays, this is exactly what Lamb looked like. It was like an alien gray.
Okay, so I gotta just throw this in. Again, I gotta come in from the spiritual side. What's his name?
Lamb.
What is the forces of evil always trying to do?
Take what Jesus does or what God does.
So if the Lamb came to take away the sins of the world, and Aleister Crowley is the head of the Church of Satan, but what he ushers in is called Lamb. Just interesting.
Throwing it out there.
Well, and then 30 years later, roughly around there are two other men. One is the father of Scientology, and the other one
was just another scientist.
But they did another ritual based off of Aleister Crowley's, but they tried, it's called the Babylon working, and they tried to open the same vortex, but wanted to bring in the spirit of Babylon. For those of you, if you've stuck with us through our Revelation series, if not, we highly encourage you to go. Well, what is the spirit of Babylon? It is the whore of Babylon, which is the whole end times. That's that that working, the new government, the
new religion.
Yeah, one world religion, one world government, the whole 9 yards. That's what they tried to bring in. And they believe that they succeeded and that the Whore of Babylon is walking around today. And there are many who would agree with that,
right.
maybe.
Interestingly enough, though, they did that in 1947, which was the same year that Aleister Crowley died and the same year that Israel became a nation.
Bingo. So really at the heart of all of this, no matter how you look at it, it is spiritual in nature. The fallen realm have continually made contact, and what do they want? They want people to worship them instead of worshiping God.
Right.
At the core of all of this, that's what it is. And so as Christians, when we can see all this stuff, when we see things coming up on the news all the time about Stargates and wormholes and portals, and as we will breach into then the alien phenomenon, and I would say deception coming up, we need to look at it through spiritual lenses.
Right.
So the problem with all of this out there now and making a big push, who are the ones that are probably the easiest to deceive?
To a certain extent, I suppose maybe the people who are wanting a scientific answer, the ones that are searching and seeking for that knowledge to understand something, that want a tangible explanation, because they're going to continue to seek that until perhaps they're offered something that they can hold on to. That's not going to be good.
Well, and if it's a quest for knowledge, if they have somehow been given an inkling that by going after worshiping these deities that are coming through these Stargates, that they will be given the gift
of
this knowledge, that forbidden knowledge. And this goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, doesn't it? That was the whole thing. Do not eat that. Why? Because it's the tree of good and evil. It's the tree of knowledge.
You don't need it. Yeah.
And they did. And look what happened.
And we continue to seek. Yeah. Continue to seek.
So what would you say to the people out there who heard the story about home setting and they're like, yeah, I'm just not buying that?
I can understand that. And a few years ago, I might have even been right where you're at. Do a little bit of research though. Do some research on the amount of just information that's out there on portals and Stargates, and that's out there on people who have had encounters or information or knowledge that can't be explained by what we know and see in the physical world. It doesn't take long. I mean, you can look in ancient civilizations, in current ones, all over the world. There's nothing that's that extensive and that has been around for that long that doesn't have something to it. And we're getting more and more people who have seen ships and lights and all kinds of different things appearing and disappearing out of nowhere. So as hard as it is to believe, we're kind of at that point now where we can't afford not to. Because what's coming, they're coming whether we want them to or not.
And here's the thing, sometimes then it's made it even easier to believe, which means you're at risk, a lot of people falling for whatever is put out there.
Of course.
I mean, well, we can look at that even what's been going on for decades with the news media and stuff. You only know what they want you to know unless you go about doing your own research, digging and finding the truth. You can only know what's fed to you,
right?
Because that's what's put out there.
What's available, right? Which makes it difficult, for sure. But I mean, to me, as we start talking about this is like the longest con that really has been played on humankind from a very early age, and from very early on in history. And we need to be ready for what's coming.
And I'm excited for what's coming, what we're going to be talking about.
Right.
But we couldn't talk about that until we first established the whole Stargate and portals and that kind of stuff that has been around from the beginning. The beginning.
The beginning of the beginning.
So we hope you enjoyed today's show, and we can't wait until we start digging into next week. This series is going to be kind of long because there's just so much information. Again, we will whittle it down and try to keep it as much to the point as possible, and we hope you do your own due diligence of doing some research and looking it up. But most importantly, when you do watch these things or listen or read, do it through spiritual glasses. Because I know the stuff we looked at, you have the narrator, could it be? It's like, no, you know what it is. Or the first thing I thought of with Om Seti is we're dealing with a spirit here. Mm-hmm. It's not reincarnation, we know that.
Right.
But there's no way she could know or do what she did. And I would even argue, even if she was reincarnated, which isn't a thing, there's no way she could do that in 2.5 years. This was something supernatural.
Right.
That came in and
used
she
her.
Was a willing vessel. Mm-hmm. And that's really what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. That's how all these gates are getting opened a lot of the times. All these portals are being opened. Things are being summoned.
Right.
They're looking for willing vessels that are searching and seeking.
So don't be caught unawares. And if you have questions, think of what it says in Matthew. Jesus says to ask, seek, and knock, and the answers will be given to you. Go to God in prayer about this. If you have things that are unsettling, talk to him, and he will provide that peace.
And actually, one could even say it talks about a portal right there, because Jesus says knock, and the door will be opened. We know a lot of this stuff is hard to take in, but once you know, you can't unknow. Whether you choose to believe it or not, you can't say, we didn't tell you. So until next time,
Shalom.